Let us, who mystically, let us, who mystically represent the cherubim and who sing the thrice holy hymn.
Welcome to our project series titled the Black American Orthodox Experience. It is a mission project of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America in partnership with the OCN. It is determined to serve as a medium to share those valuable experiences, encounters from among our Black Orthodox community and people of color within the context of Orthodox mission and outreach, for the purpose of creating a wider path and promoting Orthodox evangelism here in America. We have one of the pillars of the Black American Orthodox mission in the person of Abbess Katherine Weston, popularly known as Mother Catherine. Mother Catherine, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction. Yes, I've really been looking forward to our conversation, Father Chrysostom.
Please, could you tell us briefly about yourself?
I've been the Abbess. I've been the in charge person here at the Xenia Monastic Community in Indianapolis now since 1992, so quite some time. And this mission community was really set out to help with a convert parish nearby, and we've run books, a local Orthodox bookstore. We've had icon classes. For a while, we were helping with a youth outreach coffeehouse. So we've done quite a number of things over the years that we've been here. And in terms of my background, I was brought up in the Episcopal Church in the historic St. Philip's Church in Harlem, and came to Orthodoxy in adulthood in California. I was a nun just briefly at the original St. Xenia Skeet in California, and then the sisters really wanted to have a mission here in Indianapolis, and it was seen that I was probably the best person to be in charge, so I was sent out here in 1992 to take the helm here. So I've been at the St. Xenia Monastic Community ever since then.
You were recently elevated as the abbess of the women's monastery where you reside.
Mm-hmm.
This makes you the only abbess of color in America, doesn't it?
And just to clarify, I was in charge as the superior from 1992. I was elevated as abbess. Many people thought, oh, does that mean you're going to a new community? Because so often a woman is elevated as abbess when she begins to take charge. So many people ask me, oh, does this mean you're being transferred somewhere? But in this case, it was an elevation and really a spiritual blessing and initiation on the work that I had already been doing. So it's really a continuation. But as far as the question of, am I the only abbess of color? Actually, no, there's an Ethiopian monastery that's being founded in upstate New York that has an African-American abbess, but I'm the only one, as far as I know, in the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Abbess Katherine, it's obvious that monasticism among the Black Orthodox community in America is very scarce. The number is very few. One time I was flying from New York, and while I was online to check in on my cassock, because of so many searches of my body while on cassock, a Black American young man approached me and said, "You are a pastor?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why not be on the clerical shirt as other pastors be, so that it will be easier for you to check in?" Well, I told him, "Thank you, but that I'm a monk, I'm a tonsured monk. That's why I have to appear this way." And he said, "What does that mean? Are you Catholic?" And I said to him, "I am Catholic, but not Roman." And that brought a lot of monk. So, and during my outreach in train stations as well, many Black American policemen, officers, they always approach me and said, "You're a pastor?" I said, "Yes." And they asked me, "Do you feel comfortable?" Because they see me always passing by and they asked me, do you feel comfortable, being on this robe always and not on the clerical? They are very familiar with the clerical shirts. What are some of the characteristics of your Xenia Monastic Community? And what are you doing to propagate monasticism in general, and in particular, what you are doing to encourage monasticism in our community of colors here in America?
Yes, so some of the characteristics of the monastic community. I think one of the things that's really noteworthy is that all the sisters here are very creative in at least one avenue, sometimes multiple ones. We have two here who have quite a long history as editors, one as one of the finest proofreaders you'll ever see, authors, poets, and we're talking about 3 or 4 people, iconographers. So it's a very creative community. And I wouldn't say that we have a special outreach to people of color within the neighborhood. The church that we mostly attend has few people of color other than founding members. But our outreach is that all of us have been very involved in the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black from the earliest years. So in terms of promoting the work of the fellowship with the national outreach, we're very involved in that. So that has involved talks, it's involved having book tables at the conferences, it's involved publishing, podcasts like this, and any activity that we can do to support it. And now that the fellowship has its own publishing arm, the Unbroken Circle Press, I'm the general editor, and 2 of the other sisters here are staff editors of the Unbroken Circle Press. So they're working very much behind the scenes, bringing out Foundations 1994 to 1997 that has, as the title implies, sort of the foundational talks or messages of our first 4 years. And then Jubilation, Cultures of Sacred Music, that was published this past October, that talks about baptizing culture, specifically in the area of music, and promoting a dialogue between Orthodox liturgical music and African-American hymns, whether they be the Negro spirituals or the gospel music. So my sisters were very involved in producing those materials. Now, the other part of your question in terms of promoting monasticism, I hope at least by our lives we don't discourage it, because, in the service of the elevation of the Abbess, which is the same as the service of the elevation of the Archimandrite, so you're familiar with it, they say lead by example, lead by example. So I'm certainly hopeful that my example doesn't discourage vocations. As far as actively encouraging them, not even in terms of race or ethnicity, I have to take very seriously the example of Saint Anthony the Great. And that is when Paul the Simple came to him asking for monasticism, he wouldn't even let him in the door. This was an 80-year-old man that he left out in the hard desert sun for 3 days, kind of testing his zeal before finally saying, oh my goodness, if I don't bring him in, this is going to be terrible because he can't survive longer than this. And he became really a wonder-working elder, St. Paul the Simple. So in monasticism, we can't really take the path of the world, which is advertising, trying to be attractive, trying to be enticing, trying to package things in ways that appeal to people's ego or passions or so on, because most advertising is based on encouraging sin, really, gluttony or something else. And it's really the opposite approach. You almost discourage and make sure that it's what a person wants to do, because we're less capable of making long-term commitments, perhaps, than generations in the past. And you don't want someone coming to monasticism thinking, well, I'll try it out for a few years, take the vows, and then, if I'm bored or it's not for me, I'll go on and do something else. So we really have to take it slowly. When people do come to monastic communities to join, we really have to take it slowly, let them come and visit for a while, take weekend pilgrimages, then maybe come and stay for a week or so, and then maybe later on a month, and just really take it very, very slow, because it requires building in the capacity for stability and steadfastness. in a culture that doesn't really value that or help form it in people. And you can't become a monastic thinking, well, 51% I want to do this and 49% I don't, but 51% is the majority, so I'll go with that. It's got to be 100% you want to do it. And it has to be that you want to do it on your bad days. It has to be that you want to do it on days that you have regrets, whatever. And so because of the need of forming that kind of stability, again, I say I hope that my example doesn't discourage, but I wouldn't actively encourage quite in the way that you asked. Does that make sense? Nobody would be happier than me to see more African American vocations in the Orthodox Church, but I'm also extremely happy to see African American families and bringing up children in the church too.
Thank you, Mother Catherine. You recently published a new book titled Jubilation, Cultures of Sacred Music.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us what inspired your work?
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm the editor of it, and I contributed 3 chapters. It's a multiply authored book. So it has chapters by a number of engaging writers, including Father Moses, Father Damascene. It includes interviews with contemporary composers like Benedict Sheehan and Nazo Zakic, who are very well loved. And Nazo in particular, I was very surprised to discover when I interviewed him that he actually uses the spirituals as an inspiration for his work. And I don't just mean a casual nod to it. I mean that when he discovered an 1860s volume of about 150 spirituals, he literally took a year and memorized all of them, sang them to himself, all day long, and memorized them, and then began to create liturgically, having invited all these melodies into his soul as part of his creative process. So I would say that the very beginning of the inspiration actually went back to 2005 when we had our conference in Denver, and Father Martin Ritzy recently elevated to proto-presbyter of the Orthodox Christian Mission Council. He was our guest speaker that year, and after presenting on what the missions were doing in Africa, he said to us, why don't you use your spirituals as an inspiration for Orthodox liturgical music? And all the attendees of the conference were very inspired and started kind of exploring what melodies could be used for what, and how and where to take that direction. I was uniquely in a position to go further with it because I had a lifelong hobby of musical notation. So when I came home, I actually began to work on an anaphora. I wouldn't start there now as perhaps the capstone of the liturgy and the most difficult piece, but that's where I started. I started with an anaphora, and I wrote something 2005, and then did some writing in the subsequent years. So that was one inspiration for the book. The other inspiration actually came from some of the younger board members of the fellowship, because we had had so many presentations on gospel music and spirituals both. We'd had so many presentations from Father Moses, Father Damascene, and perhaps some others as well. And so they thought it was time to bring those together under one roof, so to speak, and really share that with the world. So there were kind of those two influences.
Okay, can you share with us your recent musical endeavors, how it can help in the efforts of reaching out to the people of color here in America?
Yes, so that liturgy that anaphora that I was telling you that I wrote in 2005, I believe it was the next year, 2006, I did share that with the conference. And my abbess at the time actually was an operatically trained soprano, and there was a wonderful Irish tenor at the conference, a pastor as well. It was written for 3 voices. I sang the alto. So we actually performed it, not liturgically, but we performed it for the conference just to share that. And I think everybody appreciated it. You can't necessarily just take one piece and stick it in a liturgy. It depends on how well it blends with the other music that's already there. But then when I did have opportunity to have it used in liturgy here locally, because a choir came through that was able to, maybe a 16-voice choir came through that was willing and able to learn the music and sing it during a liturgy, the priest who was serving hated it. So it was kind of hard to move forward. So it really was by God's providence. I felt moved maybe back in 2019 to do a little more writing. And I do have a musical partner in crime who was actually born at the monastery when her father was our pastor, and her name is Molly. She's been very encouraging of everything I've written, and she has a master's in violin teaching, violin pedagogy. So she's very well placed to, to comment and make suggestions and improvements and so on. She's been very encouraging. And then this is one of those places where sometimes God's finger can just give the slightest nudge or open a door, and then everything changes. She introduced me to her choir director, a Russian woman by the name of Dr. Zhanna Lehmann, who by God's providence was introduced to spirituals while she was still in Russia and sang them in choirs. Russians absolutely love spirituals. So she did that, and Zhanna was preparing for a conference and included 3 of my pieces in that conference. I actually met her in person for the first time at the conference. We had communicated, over Zoom, but we met in person for the first time at the actual concert. So, and she recorded them for me. So once I had some things recorded, we produced a CD that included 3 of my pieces, and were able to begin to disseminate that and so on. And so the momentum began to build with that. And then she challenged me not to just write individual pieces, but to write an entire liturgy. So I trusted her. She has a doctorate in choral conducting, and she's also on the committee. So I really trusted her judgment on that. So I began writing a whole divine liturgy, which was just completed on this past Sunday of the Samaritan woman, when Christ is engaging a woman of a different race. That missionary conversation at the well. So the liturgy was finished on that day. And God willing, this coming month, I'll be presenting it at the St. Vladimir Seminary Summer Music Institute, where all the attendees will sing portions of it. So that's how that project is developing. And then we hope to sing it for the first time in a service at the forthcoming conference of the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black in October, Houston. The dates are October 13th through 15th, hoping to sing it on Saturday the 14th at a liturgy there. And we are in the process of assembling a choir. So if your listeners are interested in being part of musical history, Orthodox musical history, and have a good voice, read music, and commit to rehearsals, and then we would welcome their getting in touch with us. And, we'll be forming a choir just for that event.
Mother Katherine, what exactly inspired you to put together this music and share with us how it can enrich our liturgical life generally as Orthodox Christians?
I shared with you how Father Martin Ritzy gave me that initial impulse, but that impetus, but that doesn't really say how I go about the process. So I've tried different approaches, but if there's a particular part of the liturgy, or, it could be another service. As I said, the Palaileos is obviously part of Matins, and I may write things for, for other services as well. But whatever part of the service that I'm wanting to write, then I start thinking what melodies would be a good foundation for that. And I have a good fair familiarity with the spirituals. We sometimes sang them in church when I was growing up. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother was a graduate of Fisk, where the spirituals are first brought to stage, from the field to the stage, actually to help support an African-American land-grant college that would have otherwise closed its doors for lack of funds. So my grandmother was a graduate there, and she had plenty of records of the Fisk singers singing the spirituals. So I grew up with quite a bit of exposure to them. A lot of them are very quick and lively, so maybe not great candidates for what we're trying to do. So I started searching through the slower ones and just try to find a melody that would adapt well to the particular thing I'm trying to do, and whose message works well for how it would be used in the service. So for instance, my cherubic hymn is based on Motherless Child. So that's a real lament. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, and it's a real lament of the soul. And when we feel far from God, even if it's just because we've gotten caught up in all the busyness of the world and things that we have to do, and we haven't been as prayerful as we like, that longing awakens in the soul, and we do feel like a motherless child. And what can remedy that more than the great entrance of Christ, where we're reenacting his entrance into Jerusalem. We're receiving Christ upborn by the angelic hosts. So let us, who mystic mean, let us, who mystic mean, represent the cherubim, and who sing the thrice holy hymn, sing the thrice holy hymn. That's the tenor line, and the altos and sopranos are singing above, and the basses below, kind of cradling that melody. But that what the church offers is answering and healing that lament. So that's kind of my process of how I look at how I choose my source material. And then the most recent one that I finished, our upcoming conference is Anchored in the Lord. That's the theme of the conference. And so I don't know if you're familiar with that spiritual, but in the Lord, my soul is anchored in the Lord. In the Lord, in the Lord, my soul is anchored in the Lord. Before I'll stay in hell one day, my soul is anchored in the Lord. I'll sing and pray myself away. My soul is anchored in the Lord. So I drew from that for what I think of sort of as the grand finale of the liturgy, where we're being sent back into the community to bring the light of Christ everywhere. When we sing, blessed is the name of the Lord from henceforth and forevermore, right? Blessed be the name of the Lord, henceforth and forevermore. Blessed be the name of the Lord, henceforth and forevermore. Wouldn't that be a powerful way to go back into the world? You'll be singing that in your mind and bringing the church with you. So I'm hoping by that we can do concerts in places that our fellow African Americans or people of African descent might, neighborhoods or places where they would see it, be attracted, maybe during Black History Month on Juneteenth, things like that. It could even be in a public square in a park, give concerts, have a monthly liturgy somewhere using these melodies for things, because I know that there are Black people who are attracted to Orthodoxy theologically, but love the music of the Black church so much that that's just a deal breaker. So I'm hoping that for people like that who really love the music of the Black church and the theology of the Orthodox church, that would open a door for the fullness of Orthodox Christian life and practice to them. And also for those of us who are already in the Orthodox church, I think the music we grow up with is something like comfort food. You taste the foods of home. I'm sure you have comfort foods from Nigeria, Father.
Yes, we do.
It would just
absolutely.
Your heart just kind of opens and relaxes and melts in a way that when you're in another culture, you sometimes carry a certain tension about you. And there's certain, so I'm hoping this music will be kind of like comfort food that can just kind of open the heart for those of us who are already in the Orthodox Church, but sort of miss the musical comforts of our original home churches.
Thank you, Mother Catherine. We appreciate your insight. And hopefully we are looking forward to have your musical compilations to be used widely, especially within our Black American gathering. Currently, we are using it locally with the blessing of our local hierarchy. We are using it, beginning to put it during our liturgical services, and hopefully when it receives a more canonical adoption, we'll be able to learn more of it, adopt to it, and sanctify our life as Orthodox Christians with it.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
You know, after we get this step completed of the 4-part harmony for the full choir, I'm also planning on going through all the pieces and writing scores for 1, 2, or 3 voices. Even though they're written for choirs, I will be producing music for either a cantor or a small choir.
Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to our next encounter.
Absolutely, absolutely.